Uh-oh. Well, we're live now.
Well, okay.
He should be back in a second. I'll wait till he comes back.
I was
There
killing
he
the
is.
light behind me because it was kind of blinding. So
Yeah, no problem. All right. So, welcome, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to actually chat with me. I'm sure you're just now catching your breath after the season with setting all your bees out for almonds. But I thought this would be a great opportunity to kind of talk about what's going on. There's kind of some bad things happening in the beekeeping industry right now that can be a little bit scary to people who don't know about it. So before we get into that, I thought we could just kind of go round table and introduce yourself and talk about what you do. Whoever wants to start.
Blake, you're
Start with
first.
Blake.
I can do it. Okay, great. I'll try to make it brief. I mean, I think at the core, I'm a commercial beekeeper, and so I've been a commercial beekeeper for over 20 years, and so I have a migratory commercial beekeeping, a couple different migratory commercial beekeeping operations, and so we pollinate almonds. We produce honey in the Midwest. We do our splits in Texas, and actually because of colony collapse disorder in 2006, 2007, I was a small commercial beekeeper at the time, and lived through that and said, wow, this really stinks. I better diversify. I don't know if I can, I don't know if I want to rely just on bees to survive, because, wow, these losses are tough. And so, have since started a handful of other businesses, a couple different bee supply companies, commercial bee supply and the bee supply. And we have a packing company through Desert Creek Honey. We do a lot of brokering of bees in California, where we bring other people's bees in from all over the country to pollinate the almonds. And then we raise and sell a lot of honeybees. So we're kind of got fingers throughout the industry, which is really interesting right now as we're seeing these losses. I have the opportunity to have a lot of therapy sessions with a whole lot of other beekeepers as we all co-commiserate what we're seeing today.
Charles Linder. I run about 5,000 hives. I've been in it about the same time as Blake. This is kind of my retirement gig from engineering for big manufacturing companies. We started producing honey, and the honey market collapsed 4 or 5 years ago, and I said enough of that. So we've kind of switched to pollination. We do almonds, a lot of watermelons, and some cranberries in summertime. So,
All right, I'm Richard Coy. My brother and I run somewhere between 10 to 12,000 hives every year. We are in South Mississippi, down on the Gulf Coast. We are Russian. We have Russian stock, and so we sell Russian packages and 5-frame nukes, as well as queens. We also produce honey on the Gulf Coast and in North Dakota, and we also run bees in the Delta of Mississippi. And so we try to get all of our bees off of the coast of Mississippi during the summer. Also, during that time, we also pollinate about 1,000 acres of melons and squash, all the cucurbits.
Okay, awesome. So let's start with Blake, and let's pretend that the person who's watching hasn't heard any news about the mass colony die-offs that are happening. Can you explain what is going on and pretty much what you're seeing?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, Charles and Richard, you guys feel free to jump in. I can speak from a perspective of what I'm seeing in California. A distinction I want to make right up front is a lot of people hear California and assume that these losses are a California issue. It has really nothing to do with California. These losses that we're seeing are nationwide. It just so happens that it takes most of the bees in the United States to pollinate the California almond crop, where 85% of the world's almonds are grown. So you have most of the commercially managed bees in the U.S. in California this time of year, and that's the first event of the season. So most of us are really going through our bees for the first time of the year in California, or we're in other parts of the country looking at our bees after they've been hibernating all winter, and getting them, see if they're strong enough to send to California for almond pollination. So you kind of have this industry-wide collective look at all the bees in the country over the same 2 to 3 week period. So that was what was happening, starting about January 10th or so to January 25th is when we're all looking at all the bees in the entire country at once. And I broker, tens of thousands of hives in California. So I'm getting bees from all over the country, from all different beekeeping operations, from all different skill levels, all different treatment methods, all different corners of the country. And I started seeing pretty fast that as we were getting honeybees that were coming out of sheds that were stored overwintered in sheds, which is a whole nother topic. And then bees that were already overwintered in California and bees that were overwintered elsewhere in the country, we were seeing a roughly 50% loss rate on all those loads coming in. And so, we get a truckload of bees in, half of them were not either dead or they were not the quality needed, not the quality we're used to seeing year over year. And these were from fantastic beekeepers. I mean, the best beekeepers in the country who would literally, if they had $5 left in their hand and they could buy lunch for themselves or buy a pollen patty for a beehive, they would buy the pollen patty for the beehive. I mean, these are dedicated beekeepers who for 20 years have had phenomenal bees. And in some cases, they were seeing 80, 90% losses, and they didn't change anything they've been doing. They had the same treatment methods. Their mite levels weren't high. They had done all the right things and were seeing these massive losses. And so that was, it wasn't just me. It was dozens of beekeepers and brokers kind of all at once looking at their bees going, oh my goodness, we're used to a 10, maybe 20% overwinter loss. We're seeing a 50% overwinter loss. And so that kind of triggered the alarm bells. And so USDA, some other researchers kind of flooded to the Central Valley where you've got lots of bees and started doing comb. They took samples of comb, samples of pollen, samples of honeybees, live bees, dead bees, samples of varroa mites, just to start the diagnostic process to hopefully help understand what's happening here. Whatever it is that's happened last summer or fall. So, it has nothing to do with something in California. The bees were showing up to California in trouble. So something was occurring 6 months ago, 3 months ago, that triggered this, but the outcome is just now evident. Sorry, that may have been more of a spiel than you were looking for. I've had a chance to rehearse it a few times at this point.
No, the viewers need to know every aspect of it. So thank you. You explained it really well. Richard,
Blake,
it looks like your screen went black. Oh,
Blake, are you seeing the same kind of drops from the on the ground bees, the stuff that's been on the ground since December and January and down in Texas and Florida and that, or is it mostly just storage stuff that's been packed away?
Yeah, that was one of the first things I was super curious because, we started looking at bees that were not in sheds first, because bees don't usually come out of sheds until later in January. So at first I thought, maybe this is just the outdoor overwintered stuff that we're seeing these losses. And then bees started coming out of sheds. And I would say, just from my personal observation, this isn't a scientific survey, I'd say that the bees that were in sheds fared a little better. And I would say maybe 10% better than bees overwintered outdoors. But I would say that's a very normal observation. Like I see that every year. I feel like shed bees do 10 to 15% better loss rate wise, which is why I put my bees in sheds. They do a little better. But the loss rates were still higher, much higher than they usually are.
Well, there's a couple things the people watching need to understand is, Florida had some storms last fall, wiped out the pepper crop. Georgia, Mississippi, all those regions there have had a really tough winter. So the bees are a couple of weeks behind where we would expect them to be. Instead of pulling pollen in late December, it was mid-January before it was even warm enough to talk about it. So I wondered how much of that played into the system and whether everybody was aware of there's two different models coming into the California region.
Yeah, it's a good thought. I mean, I think it's yet to be seen. There are so many possibilities of what could be causing this. Is it one new virus? Is it new pesticide usage that's nationwide? Is it unique issues that have impacted every region all in the same year? It's common that we have a region that is negatively impacted one year. A hurricane in Florida, wipes out the bee population, but they're good everywhere else. Could it be that it's a perfect storm of 5 different factors in 5 different regions that all happened at once? I don't know.
One of the other things I'd like to point out is that I know it's kind of a shock for you, but sitting at CSBA, California State Beekeepers Association meeting last fall, there was already talk of trouble going into the sheds. So
yes,
from Blake's perspective, one of the things everybody needs to understand is that on the industry side, we don't have a good forecasting system yet. It's the telephone, tell a friend, start talking in October and November, and then open the box in January, surprise. So that's part of our issue coming into this also.
Yeah, very succinct way of summing up our communication system in the industry. Yes.
Yeah,
very true.
As we were bringing our bees out of North Dakota down to the Gulf Coast, everything looked really good in late October, early November. But we also run, and we had put a lot of pollen sub on those bees after the honey flow in North Dakota. And I feel like that helped. Our bees that were in row crop areas in the Delta of Mississippi we did not give them pollen substitute because they were bringing in pollen. But as it turned out, it seemed to be mostly grass pollen, which is not very beneficial to raising brood because the broadleaf weeds had been pretty much wiped out. So I believe that a lot of the problem is a nutritional problem, even though it may not all be caused by herbicide use. Florida and Georgia, as Charlie mentioned, they lost their fall forage due to weather, and there may be some nutritional problems going on nationwide that are caused by different problems. But I think nutrition, or the lack thereof of proper nutrition, is leading to the collapse that we are seeing. Now, I could be completely wrong. That's just my opinion.
You pointed out something, Richard, that's really important, because I'm going to point out something. Last year, I had these kind of losses. It's a little frustrating, that I got better and everybody else went downhill. But the reality is it's been a concurrent problem within the industry, even over the last 15 or 20 years. It's just a smaller subset of individuals. I wasn't the only one that got hammered last year. There were other people. But when we started doing the testing, the first thing we saw was really high virus loads. And my viral load guy kept telling me the same thing. Feed, more nutrition. They're not getting what they need over the course of the summer to fix the viral load issues. So this year we focused on that. We did a little bit better, but we had a big problem this fall, also weather related. We had 2 issues actually. One is no fall flow because of drought. We literally had nothing going on. The goldenrod was gone. Horseweeds, what we call ragweed, that has disappeared in our area due to herbicide use. But between lack of rainfall and only having goldenrod and asters available in the fall, we just didn't have any fall pollen. And that was upper Midwest overall was pretty much tight in that area.
Definitely. And I think too, the more I've even digged into beekeeping, the more I'm seeing just everything's connected. If you don't have the nutrition, the bees can't, just like us, you can't fight off anything that comes your way. And pollen patties, that only does so much. It's not real pollen. In terms of like herbicides though, Richard, can you kind of expand on that a little bit for what is actually going on with that and why that could be a factor?
Well, we've seen the increase in herbicide use since the early 90s when Roundup came onto the scene. I believe that was 95 or 96. But Roundup tends to stay where you spray it, but we have migrated to using other herbicides such as dicamba that once it's applied, it doesn't stay on target. And so it can get up and move around in a gaseous state. They call it volatilization. And the research that's coming out over the last 2 years that involves the effects of dicamba on plant interactions with pollinators is showing that when these herbicides, auxin herbicides is how they act. When these auxin herbicides come in contact with the broadleaf plants that are not tolerant, something happens and the pollinators are not attracted to those plants anymore, or very little. I think the latest data shows that there was a 70% reduction in pollinator visits when 1% of the application rate, which is considered a drift rate, was on those plants. So there's a lot of herbicide floating in the air that we have been unaware of in the past, but I started seeing my problems in 2017 when the dicamba tolerant crops came onto the market. So I firmly believe that the herbicide issue is a major issue. I can compare my bees in the Mississippi Delta with my bees in North Dakota, and there is a drastic difference in the health of those bees. The North Dakota bees are a lot better than the Delta bees. And I've had people ask, why do you keep going to the Delta? Well, my business has to maintain between 10 to 12,000 hives. And there's only so many bees I can place in North Dakota. And I think Blake understands that. You can't just take all of your bees to one place because that's what you want to do. You have to have the locations. And I still had locations in the Delta. And I guess I'm either insane or an eternal optimist. It's one or the other. Because I keep thinking it will get better, but it's obvious it's not getting any better. So those are just my observations.
Richard, you pointed out something that I'm getting to be the point where I'm the old guy in the room, so I get to throw in a little history here. I've been around ag all my life, and you're exactly right. Roundup came out in the early 90s, got real popular in the late 90s, and was kind of a miracle, really. But the problem is we've been really cheap. So overuse. We used to not worry about pastures. You just spray the crops, and now suddenly we're spraying everything with Roundup. And of course, you didn't note it, but that led to Roundup resistance. So over the last 20 years, between Roundup and then now the shift to dicamba, the amount of herbicide use and mowing programs in the United States is just scary. Here in my home county here, I did some math. We figured out that the county road commission in my county alone mows down almost 7,000 acres of goldenrod and asters all year round, and specifically in the fall.
Yeah.
One thing that, because you guys are highlighting it, and we've all talked to, half the industry amongst us in the past couple of weeks. And it's evident that bees are kind of balancing on a razor's edge. And, you mentioned weather, Charles. Bees are tough. They're made to endure weather. And it shouldn't take, a rough weather event to just wipe them out. And yet it can. And I think they're facing so many pressures from so many angles, from pesticides, herbicides, weather, nutrition, not having enough clean forage. Richard, you mentioned bee yards. There's nowhere in the country you can put bees that is good for them that there aren't already bees.
That's right.
Because of urbanization and monoculture farming, there's just no land left. And so we could probably easily identify a dozen major factors impacting our bees today. And so it doesn't take much to just nudge them over the edge. And I feel like that's what we're seeing this year is something has nudged them over the edge, but there's a litany of a dozen problems that have built them up to the point of collapsing, when something pushes them over the edge. So I think what it takes is a holistic approach to research. Number one, we want to make sure that we consider every possibility and give all of them equal time for research. But we have to look at a holistic approach of, as a government, as individuals, we have to think of pollinators before we take actions, and what the consequences are going to be if we don't. And years like this are showing the consequences as a society when we don't pay attention to pollinators of what happens.
Blake, I appreciate that sentiment. There's a couple thoughts I wanted to get in here in this discussion, and I think we as an industry have to approach the holistic approach for us. We have to figure out, as the shepherds of the beekeeping industry, or the canary in the coal mine, what that entails. And I disagree with you a little bit on the research side. The last 20 years, we've researched this stuff to death, and we've got nothing. At some point here, we, the beekeepers and the pollinator people, not the scientists, not the USDA, but us as beekeepers, have to ask what it is it's going to take to fix this, and what do we actually need. If we manage this time to get the attention of the media and the government, shall we say in this case, what is it we're asking for? And that's the key question for me. We didn't do it last time, all the hubbub that went out, but we didn't have a good ask. But at that point, we didn't know. It was all new. We've got 20 years of experience here. Now we need to ask ourselves what it is we want and what will help us move this ball forward and get off this razor's edge, or back away from the cliff, as I like to refer to it.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Taking the long-term approach is really important. I see it as we have a short-term crisis that we have to get over as an industry, but there's a long-term problem that led to that short-term crisis. And you're right, if we don't explore how do we dig ourselves out of this hole, it's just going to keep happening.
Well, you mentioned something there, and we as an industry, as you all know, are not very well organized. We're a bunch of beekeepers spread out all over the country. We get together once a year for about a week, and then we go our separate ways again. That's not working for us. We've got to sit down and say, what it is do we really need to do this time that's differently?
We need a policy change at the EPA on how the risk assessment is done for bees, for pollinators. I mean, they use honeybees as the sentinel for all invertebrates, but there's not enough research being done on products before they are put on the market. Things are rushed to the market with minimal research, and then after they're on the market, we have to look at and see what the problems are, and then it takes 20 years to get that problem product off the market.
Richard touched on something there that everybody needs to be aware of. The testing for herbicides, insecticides, any pesticide that's done on honeybees is done in what's called a cage trial for honeybees. Basically, they take some adult bees, put them in a glass jar, and expose them to whatever chemical they're worried about at that time, and then see if they die. They don't do anything on brood or larval or long-term effects or colony level effects. It's just a quick, did it kill the bees in the jar or not? And then it's done. And that's
well, even go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, that's just not an adequate way of testing. In 1977, that was the best we had, but we're a lot smarter than that now at the beekeeping level and at the insect level, but not at the regulation level.
Yeah, I was going to say, even at least some of the scientists I've talked to that study bees, they perform differently in a lab than they do out in just your normal everyday life too. So it's hard to really kind of judge, okay, this is safe for bees unless you put it on everything. But then at that point, the damage is already done.
Yeah. I participated this summer in a USDA. It was a little get together. It was an online thing, lasted 2 days, where they presented a bunch of data to certain groups of us. And in those, one of those was U.S. Geological Survey. They've been doing really, really impressive surveys on the amount of pollinators lost for the last 20 years. I had no idea they were doing this work. It's the Geological Survey, and I was like, what do they have to do with this? But they're showing very clearly with thousands and thousands of data points that we're losing 1.2% of our pollinators per year. They came out at 21 or 22% over the last 25 years that we've lost. This is a continued downward spiral that's been documented by the government, but it's by this little branch that we never hear about and we never see the reports.
And on the
Yep.
same time frame, about the same percentage decline for each year is our decline in honey production in this country.
That's a great point, Richard.
Over
Talk
the
about it.
last 30
Oh,
over
yeah.
the last 30 years, we have lost an average of 30 pounds per hive in this country.
And that doesn't help when the honey prices are dropping too at the same time.
That's correct. I have a question
How do you
for
even
Blake.
eat?
I have a question for Blake. What do you see the ramifications of the losses we are seeing in the almonds now? What's going to happen in the preceding pollination events of the fruits and vegetables for the rest of the year? Do you have an idea on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and my connection broke up a little bit. Were you asking what losses are we seeing kind of ongoing right now?
Well, what I was asking, we have such high losses that we know of in the almonds. How is that going to translate to future pollination
Yeah,
events throughout this coming season, like
right.
apples and cherries and watermelons and everything?
Yeah, so I've got two guesses. One is that I see a dramatic decline in overall quality of bees, which basically means, for those that aren't commercial beekeepers, bees in the box. Whereas usually in almonds, we're I would say a 8, 9, 10 frame average of frames of bees in the boxes. We might be at a 6 or 7 frame average this year. So the quality of bees isn't there in general, and so I think that's going to mean beekeepers can't split as much as they normally do, so they can't recoup as many hives. I'm also seeing virtually no bees available on the market to purchase. There's a load here or there, but not many. So not many people have extra bees to sell. So there's not a great way for a lot of companies to come back. Beekeepers also don't have any money right now. You referenced the low honey prices. Pollination prices haven't been great. Our costs are through the roof. And so beekeepers don't have the money to rebuild. So all that, I think, will lead to a shortage of quantity of bees and quality of bees. The upcoming crops, like blueberries, apples are coming up, and apples and cherries are coming up in the Pacific Northwest. I think there could be shortages. Most beekeepers, those are not as big of crops as almonds, but not many beekeepers have their operations set up to go pollinate those either. So for those that do go and pollinate them, they're seeing 40, 50% loss rates, and it's Richard, you can't just pivot and go to Washington and pollinate apples tomorrow either. So I think there's a good chance that even if beekeepers are able to get enough boxes in the orchard, the quality may not be there to sufficiently pollinate the crops. So yeah, I would say that it's within the realm of reason that we do see a shortage of bees, and that results in higher grocery prices, and it results in poor quality fruits and vegetables. I know that the blueberry growers and the apple growers associations are already really concerned about this. They're already talking about bee losses, and what are we going to do? They're very concerned, and we've seen it in Canada the past few years, where they've had huge shortages for bees to pollinate the blueberries, and that's had devastating results for the blueberry industry up there. So I don't have a definitive answer, Richard. But I'm pretty concerned. I was in California 2 days ago and looked at thousands of bees. I was just driving through the Central Valley, and I know beekeepers in tons of orchards, and I just drove through a 2.5 hour stretch looking at bees all day long, and I was stunned. I was scared. I was genuinely scared at what I saw. So many hives I would open, there would be more pollen patty in the box than honeybees. There'd be 2 pounds of pollen patty sitting in there, and there'd be 1.5 frames of bees, 2 frames of bees. And I just saw that over and over. Absolutely, there's good operations. I absolutely would run into operations and that had phenomenal bees. So it's not the whole industry, everybody, but it was not what I was used to seeing. That's for sure.
Right. So I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. We also send bees to California, and I have 7 loads out there, but I'm not willing to go north with those bees to pollinate other crops. I have to get those back home to rebuild my numbers and to fulfill my contracts with my bees that I'm selling to people. And so I can see the guys in Texas and Georgia and Florida that shipped bees to California, they have to get those home. So I don't see the replacement for those other crops. I don't see it coming down the pipeline. So I think the loss of the bees, and as Charlie mentioned, we know there's a loss of pollinators percentage every year. We are coming up, I don't want to be doom and gloom, but we are coming up on a precipice that I don't think we've ever been there before.
Here's my fear, guys. I disagree with Blake a little bit. I think beekeepers are going to cover this really well. I think you're going to see extra splits. You'll see a few guys move around. You're going to see guys work like crazy, and come fall, we're going to be back in a better place. And that's actually my biggest concern, because it doesn't solve the problem. The problem's still here. Next year, there's still going to be a bunch of us who get hit with 90% losses. The number hopefully will be a whole lot smaller. But then if we cover our butts again like we have been for the last 20 years, you guys all know that the losses in pollination have been going from 20% up to 45% last year. Obviously, this year it may hit 55 or 60%, but they've continued to climb. We know that. And we as an industry have continued to cover that and fix it. And we've done it by decreasing honey, making more splits, not selling as many bees, not having the opportunities we had before for collection. So I suspect we're going to do it again, and we won't be having this conversation 18 months from now. And that's my frustration.
Well, the problem that we had in the original CCD scares, we brought bees over here from Australia to cover those losses. We don't need bees coming in here from any other country.
No.
That's not going to be the answer. So we've got to figure out how to take care of it. But I think the public needs to realize we are in dire straits. Now, I know we are all either insane or eternal optimists, but we are in dire straits here. There's no bones about it. So,
and I would agree. And Charles, I mean, I'm an eternal optimist, and I truly hope you're right. And I mean, I think if we do recover from this and cover all the pollination, it will be because of the incredible resilience of beekeepers and the ingenuity and the hardworking and the willingness to, drain their bank accounts and their savings accounts to just try to make it one more year. So I think that's a possibility. The pessimistic side of me, I just keep talking to people. I talked to a guy yesterday, 15,000 hives. He's at 1,500 right now. And I just keep having these conversations that I don't normally have. And this year it's, I'm done. I can't do this. I can't rebuild. I might be able to get back up to 3,000 out of 15,000. I hope you're right that beekeepers will bounce back and cover everything. But there's just a lot of guys this year that are, at that 80 to 90% loss, and that's tough to recover from. Now, statistically, hopefully it's not so many that we can't, work our butts off and recover. But it's a lot more than normal, for sure.
You said it exactly there, Blake. Last year I was in the exact same position. I went from seasonal high of like 4,700 down to 400 and some change. Okay. And the only reason I continued, I sat down and did the math, and I figured this year I would be working for free. That's realistically, I bought bees last year to cover my losses and made splits, and we got back up to 5,000. But understanding that was a business decision in my case, the only reason I actually did that was I had contracted with growers, and those growers were relying on me. So when I got my butt handed to me in February, I understood that in May, there was, in my case, 17 different watermelon growers expecting me to show up. So I had to make a choice. Was I going to subcontract this, send it out, replace the bees? What was I going to do? And the only reason I continued was contractual obligations to do what I said I'd do. So I understand beekeepers in that spot looking at it going, I don't think I want to do this anymore.
Yeah, and I think to your point earlier, Charles, we have to get out of the cycle of just making it one more year, and we can make it one more year, but we can only do that so many years. And to your point, we've got to look at long-term sustainability and figure out how to make this work.
From the grower's perspective too, I know there's a lot of new technology coming out. What do you think the growers are gonna think from their perspective when all of a sudden beekeepers can't make their contracts? What do you think is going to happen?
That is a wonderful question, Emily. We have to be really careful about, and Blake, I'm not trying to pick on you. You know that yelling the sky is falling, because in this particular case, we're going to get replaced if we're not careful. There's already another variety of non-Pirelli almonds out there that are self-pollinating. We've got the USDA working on self-pollinating blueberries. This is across the board. We have a company out there called Furman Pollen, which is specializing in aqueous spray of pollen. They collect it and spray it in the orchard. So as we have troubles and losses and make a lot of noise about it, competing industries are going to continue to try to push us out of the market entirely. So it's something we have to be really careful of how we approach going forward.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Blake.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of economics. Ultimately, farming is a razor thin margin business, and I do think that's where beekeepers and growers do have to work together and say, hey, what's affordable? What makes sense? No one can price gouge. There's years where there's too many bees for pollination. We've seen that the past 5 years in almonds. There have been plenty of bees for almond pollination. And then we have suddenly a year where there aren't. And so those are the years where we work together with growers and try to maintain a price point that works for everybody. And I think as long as we can continue to do that, we'll continue to have a great working relationship. And so far that's working.
You said it right, Blake. It's that relationship, because I looked at mechanical bees and mechanical pollination, and I'm a mechanical engineer. It is entirely practical to do mechanical pollination, whether you want to do it robotics, aqueous spray, feather duster systems, whatever you want to call it. The problem is it's not cost effective.
Right.
Well, as long as we stay in that cost effective range and can work cooperatively with our growers so that they know somebody will be there to pollinate the next year, we're in good shape. But the minute the doubt starts to come in, when my watermelon grower doesn't know whether he's going to get bees for the next year or two, the panic starts to set in, and other options, and what else are they going to do? Those are the kind of things we've got to be aware of.
That's why we need research to help us determine what the actual problems are, so we can give, so the growers will have some hope that we can get this turned around. So we do need the research, but we need real research looking at all of the reasons, not just some of the reasons. I think in the past, some of the probable causes were never looked at due to politics. We need to get politics out of the way and find out what's really going on.
I think that's a great point.
Is it all? I'm sorry, Blake. Didn't mean to cut you.
Well, I was just going to
go ahead.
I was going to say that, I mean, we've been here before as an industry, and we were here almost 20 years ago when CCD hit, and things have gotten worse. But at the same time, we made it the last 20 years, and they've been decent years in the beekeeping industry. I mean, the last 20 years have been pretty good overall, despite these continual losses. And now we're pushed over the edge again. I have no doubt that we'll recover from this. We'll survive. We'll persist. But we just need support, and we need to make long-term changes. I mean, beekeepers and bees are some of the most resilient beings on the planet, and we'll make it through. I'm not at all worried about bees going. Like somebody asked me yesterday, my daughter asked me yesterday, she's like, "Dad, are bees going to go extinct?" I'm like, "No, that's not going to happen. We'll be here for a long time." But we need to work harder, and we need to work smarter with more collaboration to resolve these issues, and we will. but it's time to take it a notch up in the priority as a society.
Well, you made it. The two of you both brought me to a thought process here. The first time this came around, we were looking at our bees, and we looked and looked and looked and looked, as you guys know, and research has been done, and we know Varroa is a problem, but we're pretty good at keeping it under control at a professional level. We know that viruses are a problem. We know all this, but we didn't ask these questions about forage as much as we should have back then. And this is our chance to really bring this front and center and back up and say, what's the bigger problem within the bees? We know, and Blake, you know, we're doing viral testing and everybody's coming up with different results and different problems. So then what's the bigger problem that hits us all? And that's going to go back to nutrition. And as an industry, we don't have what I would call a good understanding of what bee nutrition requirements are. And we don't have a good understanding of what the baseline in the environment should be or was, and how it's changed over the last 25, 35, 45 years. We need to push for that.
Yeah, agreed.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions I keep seeing pop up too in the comments is, so we're seeing this on the commercial level, but there's a lot of hobbyists and sideliners that aren't seeing these huge losses and aren't seeing these huge drops in honey. Personally, I think part of that is just because when you have a smaller number of hives, you're not seeing that huge, like across all these states and across the country, you're not seeing that huge drop. Do you guys have an opinion about that? Why do you think the hobbyists aren't seeing as huge of drops?
The guys I talk to are seeing them. The guys that are opening their boxes. There's a lot of guys that just haven't looked yet. And then what we hear is, and I noticed a couple comments there, you know, disparaging the commercial guys and that. We see that a lot. We see beekeepers fighting against other beekeepers and make a comment. One guy says, "Oh, I didn't lose any this year. I got 10 out of 10 or 12 out of 12." Well, great. We're all perfectly happy for you. But when you've done that for 30 years straight, then we're going to have a different conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I say as far as losses, it's hard to say because number one, there has been no survey conducted of small scale beekeepers. So it's 100% anecdotal. There have been surveys done of commercial beekeepers. We are quantifying these losses. More survey results are coming out over the next few days. It's easier to quantify using actual data, the loss rates on a bigger scale. And none of that's been done on the small scale. So I think until then, we're relying on social media comments of people saying, well, my bees are alive. What we're not counting is the thousands of beekeepers that once you get out of beekeeping on a small scale, you're not commenting on social media anymore. You know, the survivors are the ones commenting. So I think that we don't have a great way to capture those loss rates. I think loss rates are naturally higher for small scale beekeepers anyway, just because, and when I was in beekeeping for the first couple of years, I lost all my hives because I had no idea what I was doing. That's going to happen. And so I think that it's a little harder to gauge an abnormal loss on the hobby level because there's so many first-year beekeepers, second-year beekeepers that, you know, through no fault of their own, just don't know what they're doing yet. Commercial beekeeping, you know, it isn't always as dissimilar as hobby beekeepers might think. I mean, when I'm producing honey in a lot of regions, I don't have more than, 30 beehives in a bee yard. You know, we have 30 beehives, and then 2 miles later, you might have 30 more. And so they are spread out over large geographical areas where you've got clean forage. And then you have people that are doing this clearly not for money. None of us are, we're all just trying to survive here. But we're spending 24/7 taking care of bees. And I've never seen people as dedicated to the health and survival of honeybees as most commercial beekeepers. And they care more about bees than anything on the planet. And that shows every day when you talk. And so they really are, as someone said, or Charles or Richard, you guys said, the shepherd of the industry. They care deeply. And there's nothing they wouldn't do to save their honeybees. And so, yeah.
There's another point I want to point out here. And I keep seeing several posts here that as talking about small scale versus commercial. One of the things we have to understand, if you're a small scale guy, that's fantastic. You guys are pollinating the local neighborhood. Okay, we're pollinating the grocery stores. Okay, at a big scale, and it has to be done, or your watermelons disappear, your oranges disappear, the apples go up price like you can't even imagine. Kiwis are unavailable, onion sets, canola oil, all of that stuff. So our job out here is a little different than the small scale guys. If we could make a living sitting at home and just making honey and keeping doing well with 8 or 10 hives, that'd be great. But that's not what the commercial industry is. The commercial industry is providing food for the United States. We produce more produce than any other group out there, and that's what we have to do. Is it hard on bees? Oh, yeah, we know that. We understand that. What we're talking about now is over and above the typical hard on bees. This is damage that we haven't seen, even though we've been pollinating and doing this work for 20, 30, 40 years. So it's hard for me to, with a straight face and not get angry when somebody says, oh, it's because you're a commercial beekeeper. No, this is different. This is over and above what we typically see.
Yeah, and I think I like your point, Charles. I mean, I was a hobby beekeeper for a long time. I have a chain of hobby beekeeping supply stores. I teach beginning beekeeping all the time. I mean, I think that hobby beekeeping is a critical piece of our industry. I mean, there's the expertise. I mean, I learn from small scale beekeepers every day. They teach me things all the time. They bring fresh energy, fresh ideas, fresh perspectives, a voice in legislative issues. I think that one of the greatest shames, things I hate to see the most, is when they don't get along, because there's so much commonality there and ways that we can all work together to protect the bee that we all love. So I don't think it has to be a negative relationship. I think it can be a very symbiotic relationship, and should be, to the benefit of us all.
Yeah, both of you have great points. I think one of the reasons the small scale or the hobbyist people may not see the losses that we see is they are possibly in areas where they are not exposed to what we are exposed to.
Could be.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
That was all for me.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought Blake was starting to talk.
Oh, no.
Richard,
So I guess
we had a conversation last night, and Richard pointed out a current research paper that just came out here at the end of January. Was that correct, Richard?
Yes, that's correct.
On some of the herbicide problems that we're seeing. Can we get that somehow shared with the people out there?
Yeah, I can get it to Emily if she can disseminate it.
Okay.
Yep, I can put it in the description once this is up.
Okay.
Definitely. So I guess my other question too, so the beekeeping industry is under a lot of stress. I mean, we have all of these losses. We have new sprays too affecting our bees. We have GeoCure, which everybody's heard about. We also have dropping honey prices. The costs of our inputs are going up. They're skyrocketing. So where will we even have the different bills that are being proposed? I mean, I know, Charles, you've been working on trying to get us actually recognize beekeeping as its own entity instead of being grouped in with like pets, and switching to be under the FDA instead of the EPA. So where should we be focusing our efforts? Where do we need to go from here?
Go ahead, Blake. You get started.
Yeah. Well, I'll probably have additional thoughts. It's a great question, and I think that I think there is hope. I think that a critical piece when we have collapses like this is raising awareness, because awareness generates ideas, and it generates research dollars. It generates concepts, and so I think that's all really important. So right now we're trying to raise awareness that, look, we need to do a better job as a society at taking care of our honeybees. They matter. We matter. And so that's step one, is educating people about honeybees. It can be that simple. Is make sure your legislators, make sure your local townships, make sure your friends know that our way of life relies on honeybees. And so think twice before you spray your yard with toxic chemicals to honeybees. Buy American honey. Super practical, super easy. when you buy honey, tell your friends, make sure it's 100% USA honey. That directly supports USA beekeepers. So that's super practical. I think if you have legislative contacts, letting them know of this issue we're facing and that we need research, we need attention. But I think ultimately it's solved by starting all the way at the local level. Charles's point of, their state mowing 7,000 acres of prime bee forage.
County.
Oh, county. Yeah. So it's even worse. Start working on the county level. Get those counties to stop mowing bee-friendly habitat. And so I think it's easy to look at things like, climate change and say, well, what am I going to do about that? I'm just me. Well, it starts on a local level more so than ever with honeybees.
Richard, you want to go ahead?
No, you go.
All right.
I'll follow up.
The key for me is we need to be thinking long term. Beekeepers, I think, are going to cover this loss. We're going to hide it. We're going to spend more money on research, but we're going to research the same things we've been researching for the last 20 years. We've really, as a collective group, and that means all the people watching out there, small scale and everybody else, have to step back a little bit and ask what's the big picture problem and how do we address it? When we start talking about things like the U.S. Geological Survey saying we're losing 20% of our pollinators or 1% a year, how long are we going to continue allowing that and accepting that? And it's got to be bigger than just beekeepers. It's got to be every other pollinator group out there, birds groups, efficacy groups. Everybody's got to start asking ourselves, are we back where Rachel Carson said we were in 1967? Have we moved beyond something, and are we getting to the point where California, for example, Blake, you can testify to this. Once the almonds bloom, it's done. It's a desert. There's nothing out there for the bees to eat, and we've got to get out of that state. How long is it before the whole United States is the same way? We're getting to the point where any weeds, anything that doesn't look like a manicured lawn or a perfectly formed cornfield or soybean field is unacceptable. And that's hurting us, and we've got to figure out how to address that. And it's at a micro level, not a macro level. It's every single person out there who has a lawnmower that makes one extra pass on the field next door. Long term is what we've all got to figure out what the answer is.
I think both of you gentlemen have said it so eloquently, I don't have nothing else to say.
Well, so looking at it from like you mentioned, changing how if we're mowing over all of that forage and maybe even some of the herbicides that might be killing that forage, but is there a point where we have to worry maybe a little bit about corn and soy? Because I saw right now, I believe they make up 10% of all of our plants on America because of how much we're producing. Not only for us, but for other countries as well too, because it's integrated into all of our food. So at some point, is that a problem too?
That's an interesting observation, but overall, the amount of soy and corn is actually, it's declined up until the last couple of years where it increased a little bit. But overall, it hasn't changed much in 20 or 30 years. So I don't think that's our problem. Part of the problem, though, might be the amount of weeds in those corn and soy fields. The total number of acres that we use as tillable and arable land hasn't changed a whole lot. What we do on the unarable lands is dramatically changed. We're spraying pastures for weeds. We're cutting out all the milkweeds. We're mowing down CRP as soon as the goldenrod blooms. How bad is that for pollinators? I mean, that's just horrid. Our national level for mowing CRP acres says that you could mow them after, I think it's August 1st in my area. It varies all over. But right when the goldenrod and asters bloom, we just mow it all down because that's the time we can get to it. We've got to do better.
Yeah, we have groups working to get areas planted back in forage for bees, but they're not working hand in hand with the people that are destroying that habitat that they just planted. So we've got to be on the same page. It's about policy change. We have to change the policy in this country to see any different. Now, getting the policy changed, that's another challenge.
And I'd say there's, speaking, I'm assuming most of your audience, Emily, as small scale beekeepers, that is a huge area where small scale beekeepers shine. Is a lot of them have legislative backgrounds, or they have friends that are legislators, or maybe they're really good at organizing groups. And we need, we're at, a lot of commercial beekeepers don't have the time, or some of us don't have the expertise. And so we desperately need, and some of the greatest resources for affecting this change that I've ever seen have been small scale beekeepers who have stepped up and said, you know what, I can help with this, and led the charge in many cases. So it takes all of us working together to affect change at all these scales.
Yep, I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, I think you guys really explained the whole situation really well and gave the audience kind of an idea of what we should do moving forward. Was there any closing remarks you guys have that you wanted to throw out there before we close it up for the day?
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for participating, even some of the naysayers out there. It's interesting to see some of the viewpoints and comments and conversations. And Blake, I appreciate you trying to keep us up to date on what's going on out there. And I'm sorry you're in that spot out there, that's for sure.
Well, we're all together for better or worse as an industry. So happy to help where I can, and I look forward to seeing us work together as an industry. And yeah, I mean, naysayers or not, it's new perspective and new ideas. And I think that we can all look at those thoughts and really give them some thought and consideration.
Yeah, I think, Blake, you mentioned in one of your YouTube videos that's been out recently that you see this as a change in the industry. So we have reached a point of change. But we need to be able to capitalize on that change for the better, for the industry and for all of the pollinators, because whatever helps the pollinators helps our industry. And that's where we need to concentrate on making that change. We have the opportunity, and we need to seize upon it.
Yep, agreed.
I fully agree. All right.
Are you back in Texas, Blake, or are you still out in Cali?
Yeah, I got back. What is today? This is Friday, right? Yeah. I got back late.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah, that's right.
I forgot, Blake. Gas station all flowers.
I got back late Wednesday night. So yeah, I'm home for a couple days, and then I'll probably be back out there.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Yep.
Emily.
Thank you for your time. I hope this video was very enlightening and can shine a lot of light on some of the things that we need to really band together and go forward on. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.